I'm so happy to learn so much from you and your work about the Nuer and other South Sudanese. In our previous interview, you spoke about how you get into anthropology and how you get that interest to study the Nuer. And then a lot of people know you because of the book that you wrote titled The Nuer Dilemmas. And people would wonder to know about what the Nuer dilemma is. So could you please explain it to us?
Yes. Well, thank you so much for. Let's give the book the full title it has. The book is titled Nuer Dilemmas, Coping with Money, War, and the State. The state in the sense of government, Kuma.
Yes.
Okay? So just that title, what does dilemmas mean in my mind? Dilemmas have to do, in this book, with things that were changing in the society. People perceive them as changing in society, but they still weren't sure which way things were going to go. And they're actively debating or questioning or experimenting.
Yes.
And for example, unlike Evans Pritchard and others, I really wanted to write a book that would speak to the issues that were important to the people I was studying. So how do you study a society of more than 1.5 million people over a huge territory, more than 60 years? What do you focus on?
Yes.
Right. So I decided early on that I wanted to focus on what people themselves perceived as changing. And so every chapter of the book, for example, focuses on an aspect of Nuer culture and society, starting from the 30s through the, let's say, early 90s, that people perceived as changing and were questioning themselves. Let me give you a few examples that people were worried about.
Yes.
So one question people are asking themselves in the early 80s, let's say, and through, is what's the real difference between cattle and money as something that you can relate to other people, as something of exchange? Another question people are asking themselves, these marks of God, that we have,
Yes.
is something that's central to Nuer identity in a way, but really, are they really necessary anymore? Are they just a matter of tribal identification that's no longer necessary? Or are they really important for men to earn and show themselves their courage in becoming a man? These are debates that were taking place. Other debates were like, well, should Nuer Christians, should they eat the meat of cattle sacrificed, not in a Christian way, by their relatives or not? There's endless numbers of questions. How effective is cattle sacrifice in curing illness? Is it possible for a child, a very small child, to die without God being involved?
Interesting.
But these were questions that they were asking themselves. So every chapter of the book involves that. So if we look at the second half of the title, coping means people are managing with money. Okay, money is coming in, war is coming in, and the government is coming in. So one way to think about the book, I was pretty ambitious, and I do say so myself, because I wanted to capture the main transformations of such a huge number of people over a huge number of years of times, and to do it in a way that they could relate to. So let's think about it. The subtitle, money. Of course, it's not just money that's transforming. We have the development of markets, long-distance cattle markets, people getting involved in the trade. And then you have people buying and going into the labor market. All of those have major transformations in people's relationship with each other. War is not just the civil wars and everything. But there's a whole transformation of local warfare too. A movement from spear warfare, which was what was dominant, especially in the Western Nuer when I started in the 80s, to gun warfare. And think about all the questions that involves. One of the key ones was, for example, people were genuinely asking themselves in the early 80s, before the war got really hot, if you kill somebody with a spear, you know the strength of you are responsible because it was your bones, your sinews, your power that drove the spear. And you have a whole set of rituals to take care of that. But when the guns come in, even into local warfare, people began to ask themselves the question, well, is it the same? Because somehow the gun's power doesn't come from the person, it comes from within it. All the person does is aim it. And so the question is, do we have to run to the Quarmon, the leopard skin chief, or whatever you call him, or do we have another thing? And this got on and on, especially as the civil war got hotter, and the military leaders of the Civil War wanted to make sure people would follow their orders to kill on command. And that's a long story, but I've written about it. So let's go back to the last one, the state, which is an academic way of saying the government.
Yes.
So the government, the Nuer never thought of the government as a unitary thing, I would say. When I started in the 80s, people talked about the government of the right and the government of the left. Kumashwish, Kumasham. So Kumasham is seen as a very good thing. Who is Kumasham? Well, that's the local police, the Bokentot, the Bokendit, the little Gatuni, who, as people said, want people to live.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But Kumashwish, that's basically a jesh. Nongani Lia. It just brings death. Okay? And people, and so this Hukuma Shuish, people never wanted. Sometimes Hukuma Sham, the local courts, they kind of liked. But it goes on beyond that, because who has the right to govern? Who should govern? All of those questions came in, of course, and as we all know, the Nuer played a powerful role within the Second Civil War, both by having most of the fighting forces, the fact that their land was on the oil, and they made their lands a huge battlegrounds. And all of those questions, people dying, why they're dying, these bring poignant moral dilemmas. Yeah. And those moral dilemmas are so human. How can people deal with these tragedies? And so what I'm trying to say is that in studying the Nuer and in writing about them, I'm hoping that all of us worldwide, Nuer and myself, can learn more about what it means to be human. What the creativity, the tragedy, the puzzlement, the bewilderment.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. Well, Guayhelon, this is wonderful, and I'm also happy to read all the thing or to hear directly from you everything that you've written in the books. So many Nuer people appreciate your work. They're so happy for you. They might not tell you directly, but I'm telling you, they owe everything to you.
Well, I owe everything to them. Think about it. I owe my career, my curiosity. I have learned so much from the Nuer. Because when I was studying them, they were studying me. And they had lots of questions. They would ask me all kinds of questions about how things were where I came from. And those questions weren't easy to answer. And just give you one example. Of course, people were curious, why did I come? What was I doing? And I can tell you two things, actually. One of them is, first I said, well, I'm coming here to learn the language, which was true the first 5 or 6 months, right? Yes. And then people said, well, now you know it, you can go. And I said, well, actually, it's more than that. I came here not only to learn your language, but also to learn your ways of being together.
Yes.
So that someday, because where I come from, America, not many people have heard about Nitina, the true human beings, the real people. So I've come here to learn your language and then to learn your ways of living together, how you behave, your xian, so that someday I will write a book that will carry your reputation all the way to America.
That's wonderful. You learn about them, but you discover some of the things about yourself as well.
Yes.
So Amagwalum, Mundadian, there were early Nuer anthropologists that you have read their work and you also cited in your own work.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think about their research or what they did or what they put out there about Natanat?
Well, for me, having Evans Pritchard's materials was a big help because it gave me clues where to start and look at and some comparison. So I already had a good idea of how important cattle were and other kinds of things, but you can't just take him at his word. And so he was not so interested in variation of people's opinions. He was trying to take out all the variation and say, this is their culture, this is the way they all think. But we all know human beings differ, people have different opinions, plus things are changing.
Yes.
So Evans Pritchard wasn't so keen on documenting that in his work in terms of his change. But he did document some regional variations, which I appreciated, and piqued my curiosity. So he gave me something to look at, along with Paul Howe, which was a very important work. But it's just a base, because I couldn't trust it completely. Plus, from my perspective, it had a lot of blind spots. A lot of blind spots. Not only the fact there's women's experience, children, but he really didn't talk to that many people. I traveled entire length of Nuerland. I call it Nuerland, Ronur, I don't know what else to call it. Your territory, your traditional homeland territories, all the way from Mayum, all the way to Gambela. I talked to old and young and everybody. And so I was interested in a more dynamic, less circumscribed, less narrowed down notion of what a culture is, because I'm interested in the dynamics. And so I was interested in not only what people agreed upon, but especially what they didn't agree upon, because that gave me clues to what they saw as changing in their society and what they were debating.
So this is wonderful, good information. A lot of people, some people they have read about Pritchard's work, and also you mentioned him a lot. But people want to know, what did you do differently, or what did you discover that they did not?
Oh, there's so many things that I discovered that they did not.
You want to hear?
Okay, well, one of the, if you look at the book as a whole, part of it has to do, as I already mentioned, money, guns and war and government coming in. But so part of the book is about important ways of people thinking of their social relations as changing. They've always had blood, human blood is an important symbol and medium of exchange. They've always had cattle, and they've always had food, which is a very important way of who you eat with, who you don't eat with. It's very important in defining who you are relative to other people. But they didn't have these other ones back in Evans Pritchard: money, markets, a few guns. And you didn't have the same kind of wars. So I was interested in how cattle, blood, and food were people integrated then with these new forces, which is money, guns, and paper. Paper as a symbol of let's say, literacy, education, and later on religion, of course. Waragak, exactly. And so for people who can't read, Waragak's a kind of mysterious thing. It carries secret messages, kind of like blood. It all looks the same on the outside, white and black, but on the inside somehow it carries. So these are some of the things. But in addition, I was interested in defining and really developing regional variations, appreciations of that. Why? Because think about it, from Nuer history, from way back, the original Nuer, the Nuer who kind of stayed in place from time immemorial, were the Western Nuer, Jikwishe. And so their language, and I know, because I've learned both, has a lot less Dinka words, a lot less Anuak words. It has retained some of its grammatical complexity more than the Eastern dialect, and which is understandable. but they also, the Western Nuer pride themselves on being the original Nuer, the homeland Nuer, where things are, and in some ways they have had more periods of continuity up to the Second Civil War. Why? Because during the First Civil War, when things really got bad in the early 60s, their land was flooded, just as it is now in 2024.
Wow.
Huge flooding. And so that flooding, people were actually building, like places to sleep on grasses and tui covered with, floating around the rivers. But the point is, the army couldn't get in. Even the Anyanya, one army couldn't get in. So they were a little isolated. They didn't have the full shock of the First Civil War. The Eastern Nuer, now, they pride themselves on something else. They pride themselves on being the most adventurous, the people who more willing to jump into new situations, try things out. And of course they have been, because with Latjor, came over, across the Nile, and then as they came, they had many different situations. They had to integrate all these Anuak and other people, and Dinka, etc. And so they had to do it very creative. And so also, during the First Civil War, they had the full effect. Why? Because they crossed over the Ethiopian border, and that Ethiopian border was so important in having a place for people to run, for the Anyanya, and then later the SPLA to have their bases until Mengistu fell, of course, in 91. So people were moving across. They felt that they had guns, came in much earlier, even during colonial period. Because of the border there, they could move back and forth between what was the incipient Ethiopian government and the incipient Sudanese government during the colonial, and they can move back and forth. So, and they were also the first groups that started going to Khartoum during the 60s and 70s to work as day laborers, and they brought back stuff. So they are that. So often I found that the debates about, gun warfare and pollution associated with spears and guns, the Eastern Nuer were a little bit more transformed than the homeland Nuer. And so that was interesting in itself.
Right. Apart from your writing about the Nuer, articles about South Sudan, you also did some, advocacy about South Sudanese. And we would like to know about what you did, because a lot of people don't know.
No, I haven't really shared that. As when I started off, I was comfortable doing a research project about the Nuer, in the sense that I could only learn so many languages. Arabic and Nuer was a challenge. I could only study so many people and learn something. But as the war got hot, and I'm talking now the Second Civil War, and particularly after the tragic split of the SPLA between Garang and Riek Machar, and all of the aftermath and the ethnic violence and Boer massacre, the whole thing, I became very uncomfortable talking about Nuer. And the reason is I didn't want to be someone reinforcing somehow these ethnic closures. I wanted more openness and communication. So I began studying, war, but 1998, 1999, I decided academically that the only way to really try to continue to show a big picture was to team up with a Dinka anthropologist, Jok Madut Jok.
Yes.
Now, this period, 1991 to 1998, 1999, before Woonlit, no Nuer could go to the Dinka areas without risking dying, being killed. And no Dinka could go to the Nuer areas. The military had made this terrible wall. The local sub-chiefs, they were against it. But anyway, so I thought, well, if I'm going to get a picture of what's really going on. So for 2 years, Jok went to his Dinka areas, wherever we could get into. I went to the Nuer areas, and then we joined together to write articles that say, well, how does it look like, this split from both sides? So I did that. Then I began to follow. Of course, I also went to Khartoum following people. And then when I started working, the NGOs started coming in, right?
Yes.
So they started calling me because, like Doctors Without Borders, they say, well, you know, you can come in from Lokichokyo. Come visit us in our area.
Yeah.
And I say, okay. I said, you give me some logistical support with an airplane, I'll answer all the questions. And the questions are interesting. Like, please tell us, how come the Nuer only like injections? Why don't they like pills? And I'd give them the history of how injections came in or whatever. But then I would use them as a base and I could walk out by myself, pack some stuff. And that's how I did research again and again. And it just depended. I also, at a certain point in the war, I was asked to serve on something called the Civilian Protection Monitoring Team Sudan. And this was during George Bush period in the president of the United States. And they were building up the negotiations between Khartoum and the Garang and the SPLA. And the SPLA was still split and it was a bit of a mess. But our job on this mission was that any attack that took place against civilians or civilian property, we were allowed to go to. And since I was the only one who spoke Arabic and Nuer, and I was the only one, I was well known. There was another woman, Diana Guzman, who was wonderful, also on the team. So during that period, I collected a great deal of information and tapes, photographs, but I left the team after a period of time. And the reason I left the team is I felt like there was a great deal of information that we knew about attacks. We had done some research on, but had never been selected by the administrators to be a subject of a formal report.
Oh, wow.
Okay? Because we were seeing a lot more things going on the ground that was getting out. And for the time I was there, my friend Diana Guzman and I, we had permission from the US ambassador to send out preliminary reports about what was going on. And we were sending them independently. And these were very important. They were going to all the NGOs because we knew where people were attacked before they did. We knew before the UN. So that was very good. But at a certain point, there was a change at the top of administration, and those, I felt okay because the information was getting out, that I was told that I would no longer be able to write those. And it was at that point I said, okay, then I don't want to be on this team, because I felt a lot of information was being suppressed, to put it that way. So I left, took the information with me. And this information was very important later on because there was a court case in New York, which I was involved in, between Talisman Energy. Some of this information was used in there. I made a whole series of maps for those cases. And so I felt at least this information is getting out. That case, unfortunately for technical issues, never went to full trial. But there's a case going on right now in Sweden against another oil company, Lundin Oil, Swedish oil company, Swedish prosecutors, Swedish law, Swedish courts. And a lot of this information which I had collected and others has been supplied to the prosecutors there. So it comes in handy. But in addition to that, I collected always some information when I was going in the war years that was literally too hot for me to handle as an academic or even as a named person. It's not always possible to publish some material if you're people like me who's going in and out, in and out. If you're a journalist, you go in once, sure, you don't worry about coming back. You can go publish it in your name. But what I would do is if I found things that were too hot to handle, I didn't want to suppress the information. The information felt heavy.
Yeah.
Really heavy. What is my, if I don't somehow find a way to get it out, am I complicit? When does an ethic of silence become an ethic of complicity? And that question weighed on me a lot. So what I would do, all these times I went in and out, 8 times during that war, I would do what I call the big sort. I would take all the information I knew was too hard for me to handle, and I would pass it where it would become part of Human Rights Watch reports or other things anonymously. An anonymous source said this, or a trustworthy source, and then I published my academic stuff. So below the surface, I've always been committed, but not just to the Nuer, to all the Dinka, Shilluk, all the people who experienced such horrific human rights abuses and attacks. And another thing that I did, just last one, is with the forced court case, during the whole negotiation process with between the SPLA, we're talking 2004, 5, before the peace agreement was signed, and the Khartoum government was telling SPLA negotiators that all the oil's in the north. I know it sounds funny, but the problem was that the SPLA negotiators had no evidence, or they had nothing to push back against this. Yes. So I was able to get some information through other sources, academic sources and things, about where the oil wells were, and to provide this to them. So some information I helped then perhaps have a little stronger stand in their negotiations. But anyway, I don't know what that makes me, but it makes me someone who's been committed, committed since 1980 to wanting, like everybody who hears this, a better South Sudan, a better world where people and children can grow up without fear of being bombed or destroyed, where people have enough food and people have a voice in their government. And I hope that wherever you are, in the diaspora, that everybody will do their part to bring that dream that we all share to bear.
Amen. Thank you so much, Mom. Everything that you have done for us has changed our life. Your advocacy, your writing, it changes our image today. And we just would like to say thank you so much for everything.
Oh, it's a pleasure.